In February 2021, the energy capital of the world runs out of electricity. While downtown Dallas remains lit up for Valentine's Day, the Texas Electricity Company shuts off power to millions, leaving some to freeze to death inside their homes. And for an encore, they demanded to be paid for doing it.
The real slap in the face after it is when this power sort of came back, so did these astronomical power bills for people.
At one point, 1 megawatt went from $50 to about $9,000.
So how could a company get away with jacking up energy bills more than 10,000% after leaving millions of their customers shivering in their homes? The answer lies back in the 1990s.
You know, when you work for Enron, you're going to see the newest thinking. You're going to see the newest products, the newest services. You're going to see the newest markets opening up, the newest ways of thinking about things.
In the 90s, the powerful energy industry starts looking to expand from oil and gas into the government-regulated electricity business.
A handful of legislators started pushing to open up the markets and break apart the monopolies so that traders could buy and sell electricity in the same way they sold stocks on the market.
Leading the charge for electricity deregulation was a Houston-based energy company called Enron, a company that had done something similar with natural gas in the 80s.
Jeff Skilling, Enron's president and chief operating officer.
Well, actually, our natural gas business was extremely strong in the third quarter, but in addition, the power markets all around the world are deregulating, and Enron has a significant position in those markets, and so that helped the quarter as well.
Enron begins lobbying states all over the country to deregulate.
And the two most prominent examples of that would be California and Texas. And in both cases, they contributed to a disaster.
Most Americans probably hadn't heard of Enron until a few weeks ago, but here in Texas, the corporation's the stuff of legend.
Enron shares are gaining $0.50 on the day. Let's take a closer look at that.
Enron executive Ken Lay finds Governor George W. Bush is receptive to the idea that private companies can do everything better than government, including cheaper electricity for Texans. And while Enron lacks details about how deregulation will actually lower prices, it makes up for it with enthusiasm about its own corporate brilliance.
When did the price change?
The price was hidden, and it took an incredible amount of work to dig it out. Enron Online will change the markets for many, many commodities.
I like to think about Enron as sort of an investment bank in its operations, but sort of like a Silicon Valley startup in its style. There was a certain kind of swagger that developed over the course of the 1990s. A great quote from some of the company's literature was that they were always dissatisfied with the status quo and that they were always looking to see how things could be improved. What that led to was this incredible arrogance. They ran this crazy series of commercials in 2000 called the Ask Why campaign.
Why? It is a small word.
That again just presented them as this incredibly forward-thinking, slick company, and they were getting into all sorts of different markets.
You can't predict the weather. There's nothing you can do about it.
As they got more press and as they became more famous and as people like Jeff Skilling were hailed as geniuses,
that's our vision. We're trying to change the world.
They're suddenly unable to actually describe what it is they do. If you look at like letters to shareholders and stuff like that, they'll start off with, people don't understand what we are. They have a hard time describing us, but we know what we are. At one point, they were having a hard time coming up with the company's new vision statement. And Jeff Skilling said that somebody had come up with the idea of just sort of calling it the world's coolest company.
Soon, the self-described coolest company in the world will be responsible for the energy markets in the two biggest states, a responsibility seemingly lost on Enron's most senior management.
You know, the culture of Enron was one where guardrails just didn't exist.
We have the people and the skill base and the experience to win in a competitive marketplace.
It was a culture where the top executives really saw accounting rules and rules for public companies as challenges to get around. And they actually thought, hey, if we figure out a way around this accounting rule, that's because we're smart.
Reducing electricity costs is only one benefit from choice and competition.
It created a culture throughout the company that the rules don't matter.
So I'm going to get some pricing for you. I'm going to call you back.
What do you see for next week?
You're dealing with a trading floor environment where a lot of money is being passed around, and it manifested itself in all the ways you might imagine, from very fancy sports cars driving around Houston to a proliferation of topless bars to, all kinds of things.
They ran this feature periodically called Extreme Enron, and the idea was these are what Enron workers are doing on their weekends, and there are these completely ridiculous stories. People who would go race hydroplanes. One described somebody who would go orchid hunting, but they would sort of characterize it as having to dodge alligators as you're looking for the perfect orchid and stuff like that. They basically kind of encouraged risk-taking.
One thing the company didn't seem to focus on was the actual job of overseeing the power grid. While Jeff Skilling and Ken Lay were the public faces of Enron, behind the scenes were executives like Lou Pai, a notorious partier who was handed the company's new electricity arm.
Lou Pai has become sort of legendary. He and others would go to Houston strip clubs and sometimes even bring some of the strippers back to the offices and so on.
Lou Pai's fondness for one exotic dancer eventually leads to a costly divorce with his wife of 20 years, forcing him to sell $250 million worth of Enron stock. This is what's happening at the offices of Enron. And despite this, first California and then Texas will go into business with Enron after being convinced to deregulate with the promise of cheaper electricity.
We begin by attracting the kind of people that are more comfortable in an environment of change.
And now Enron is in control of the power grid. In a preview of what will happen 2 decades later in Texas, California experiences a record heat wave and power demand soars.
Almost the day this system was put into place, the electricity traders began to manipulate it and game the market.
They had these crazy sounding strategies. Ricochet was one, Death Star was one, Fat Boy was another one. And they found ways to route power in certain ways that would create blockages or spikes or a quick need for power, and then they would quickly profit from these different weird things happening in the California market.
Consumer advocate Harvey Rosenfield says Californians are being held hostage by a failed experiment in deregulation of electric utilities.
Well, our view of it is it was blackout blackmail.
Tim Belden, who ran Enron's West Coast operation, said that there was chaos in California, and chaos drove high prices, and therefore chaos was good for Enron. Chaos is profitable.
Diversity of peoples of
California's decision to hand over its power grid to the private sector proves disastrous.
Enron is a company that deals with everyone with absolute integrity.
In the chaos, Gray Davis becomes only the second governor in U.S. history to be successfully recalled.